Welcome to a new lesson on Future You, Better You. Let's talk about the entrepreneurial pivot. When an entrepreneur realizes that the current path isn't leading to the results they want, it's time for a pivot, a structured course correction. Today, we'll explore what a pivot is, why it matters, and how to execute one effectively. By the end, you'll see that pivoting isn't about failure. It's about seizing new opportunities and transforming your business for sustainable growth. Picture this. Your startup is sailing along, but something feels off. It's not achieving the results you hoped for. Rather than let the ship sink, an entrepreneurial pivot is your structured course correction. It involves making fundamental changes to your product, your overarching strategy, or even your entire growth engine. Sometimes that means tossing out an unsustainable idea altogether. Why? Because at the heart of every pivot is a new hypothesis to test, a fresh assumption about what your market wants and how you can deliver it. Now that we know what a pivot is, let's dig into what makes a pivot truly stand out and how you can recognize one in action. Now, let's look at the key markers that tell you a pivot is in play. First, it starts with being open to change. If you're too attached to your original plan, you'll miss the clues that a pivot is needed. Second, you focus on opportunities rather than getting bogged down by problems. In other words, you're always asking, how can we use this challenge to improve? Third, a pivot expands your beliefs about what's possible, pushing you to reconsider long-held assumptions. Most importantly, a pivot changes something fundamental in your business. It might be your product, target market, or revenue model. And finally, it results from a genuine shift in strategy, not just a small tweak to your tactics. Now that we've identified what sets pivots apart, let's explore the different ways a pivot can manifest and why it's more than just a quick fix. A pivot, in this first form, is all about transformation over time. Instead of minor adjustments, you're making a major, strategic, or fundamental shift in how your business operates. You might overhaul your core idea, replace your entire business model, or set a new strategic direction. The goal is to move away from concepts with limited potential and toward repeatable, scalable opportunities. You could be testing a bold new hypothesis, improving your existing product, or even developing a completely different one. In some cases, you might blend multiple models to ensure the business remains resilient. Ultimately, pivot as a change means recognizing that incremental fixes won't suffice, and having the resolve to reshape the venture at its very foundation. Now that we've explored how a pivot can fundamentally transform your business, let's examine how this change is actually a strategic decision. When we talk about pivoting, we're talking about a high-stakes, deliberate decision, not just a spur-of-the-moment reaction. It requires real effort to shift resources and sometimes even restructure your team or business processes. In practical terms, a pivot can change one or more of your startup's key components, from product features to customer segments. These are strategic choices between different possible paths for your venture, each with its own risks and commitments. Because these choices involve allocating time, money, and talent, they ultimately determine the fate of your startup, and that's why each pivot counts. Next, let's look at whether pivot happens in a flash or evolve over time. Sometimes, a pivot unfolds gradually, through a process of trial and error. You gather feedback, run experiments, and fine-tune your idea, each step guided by the context and challenges you face. This method often has defined stages, like identifying the problem, testing solutions, and refining the final approach. On the other hand, a pivot can happen as an event, a sudden, decisive shift sparked by a powerful insight or market change. Whether it's a slow evolution or a dramatic turning point, the goal remains the same: to realign the business for better growth and sustainability. With the process versus event distinction in mind, let's see how a pivot can become an ongoing state, where continuous adaptation shapes the very nature of your entrepreneurial journey. Sometimes, pivoting isn't a one-time maneuver, it becomes an ongoing condition. In uncertain or fast-changing markets, entrepreneurs might pivot frequently, leading to what we call a state of pivoting. Turnarounds are common in these contexts, as external factors, like competitor moves or customer demands, keep shifting the landscape. The big question: does perpetual pivoting sustain growth, or does it become an endless scramble for direction? Reality or myth, this constant state of evolution shows just how fluid the startup journey can be. Now that we know the 4 ways pivot manifests, let's examine the core reasons behind why entrepreneurs choose to pivot in the first place. Pivots rarely happen by accident. There are clear reasons and perspectives driving the shift. From a pivot design standpoint, entrepreneurs deliberately conceive, plan, and execute a pivot once they see the need. The cognitive perspective focuses on how an entrepreneur's mindset, perceptions, rational thinking, past experience, shapes their decision to pivot. Then there's the negotiation perspective, which highlights the firm's relationships with stakeholders such as investors, partners, and customers. Finally, the environmental perspective underscores external factors like competition, regulation, and shifting customer needs that make pivoting not just an option but sometimes a necessity. Now that we know why founders choose to pivot, let's explore a practical framework for making and guiding these crucial decisions. Slide title: Framework for Pivoting Decisions. Picture this scenario. Your startup sales are in a slump, and the buzz around your product has quieted to a murmur. That's where recognition hits. You realize a pivot may be your best move. You gather your team and begin generating options, exploring new product concepts, revenue models, and target markets. Eventually, one idea shows real promise, so you seize and test it, running a pilot to gauge traction. If your pilot delivers encouraging feedback, you proceed with reconfiguration, committing to the chosen path, reorganizing your business model, and realigning teams and resources. But even then, the market can be unpredictable. If the pivot starts showing signs of failure, you return to recognition. Potential failure leads you back to the drawing board for another round of exploration and testing. This entire process forms a continuous loop, ensuring each pivot is grounded in real evidence, enabling you to adapt and refine until you find the path that leads to genuine, sustainable growth. Now that you know how to pivot in practice, let's see some famous companies that have pivoted. Let's shine the spotlight on a few iconic pivots that brought struggling companies back to life. Audio started as a podcast platform competing with iTunes, but when iTunes dominated the market, Audio's team recognized the threat and pivoted to a microblogging concept. That side project evolved into Twitter, proving the power of quickly testing and adopting a promising new direction. Believe it or not, Starbucks began by just selling coffee beans and equipment. After a visit to Italian espresso bars, Howard Schultz pushed the company to pivot into serving fresh coffee beverages in a cafe environment. This reconfiguration changed the customer experience and led to the Starbucks we know today. In the late 19th century, William Wrigley Jr. offered free chewing gum as an incentive to buy his soap and baking powder. When he noticed the gum's popularity soared above the main products, he pivoted to selling gum exclusively, eventually building one of the world's biggest confectionery empires. Bourbon was originally a location-based check-in app that let users post photos of their hangouts. When its photo-sharing feature took off, the team stripped everything else away and rebranded it as Instagram, focusing on what users loved most, and the rest is history. In each case, these companies recognized a core threat or a new opportunity, tested an alternative, then realigned their entire business around that winning concept. It's a testament to how a well-timed pivot can redefine not just a product, but an entire industry. Short summary: entrepreneurial pivots are structured course corrections, not failures. They involve making a fundamental change, whether to your product, strategy, or entire business model, to test a new hypothesis for growth. Pivots succeed when leaders stay open to change, focus on opportunities, and follow a clear framework of recognizing problems, generating options, seizing and testing the best idea, and then reconfiguring their business around what works. Done right, pivots transform obstacles into opportunities for sustainable success. Thank you for watching, and please like, comment, subscribe for more.